What comes to mind when you hear the word matriarch?
Oh, what comes to mind when I hear the word matriarch? Justice,
Hmm.
power, beauty, ancestry, health. If the world were run by women, I guarantee you we would be in a different place. If the world were run by indigenous women who are deeply rooted in the earth, the world would be a different place.
Ashe, hi, my name's Elizabeth Yeampierre, and you're listening to Bangles and Headdresses, a conversation rooted in matriarchal ancestral traditions and reflecting on how we return to the wisdom of our ancestral knowledge and how we navigate through today's world. And today is a very, very special day. It is not only our first episode, but we are joined by Sandra Guzmán. And Sandra Guzmán is an Emmy award-winning journalist, documentary filmmaker, and above all, a storyteller and a friend. And so I am so excited and welcome you to Bangles and Headdresses. Hermana, it's un placer to have you here today. I'm so excited.
I am floored and honored because I'm your first guest.
You are.
This is an incredible honor. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Well, it is an honor to us. And I know that the books that you've written, the stories that you tell are really rooted in matriarchal knowledge. Like literally you, for me, had to be the first guest because you're sort of the manifestation of what we think when we think about matriarchy. And so maybe you can share with us some of the early memories that you have or an ancestor that really kind of shaped who you are today. I think people would love to hear that story.
Wow. So the ancestor who mostly shaped my life was a matriarch, a grand matriarch, and they don't make them like them anymore. And I feel very fortunate to have been her daughter. Her name is Lidia Gonzalez Santos.
Okay.
And she was a wise woman. She was one of 9 children, raised in a place called Las Cucharas. They've renamed it to Punta Cucharas, and they converted her land into a reserve, a natural reserve. So I know where her placenta was planted. I know that where my uncles and tias' placentas were planted, a tradition that indigenous people all over the world and in our motherland that we share, Borican, were. So she taught me about the power of what it meant to be born a girl, a woman, into a legacy of incredibly powerful, beautiful women who nurture and inspire generations. So, Mami, we were talking earlier about plants, of course.
Yes.
My favorites. And I was telling you that I have an aloe plant that was planted by my great-grandmother, Mama Ramona, an indigenous woman from Guayanilla de las Indias in the southwestern part of Boricua. And then my grandmother, Mami Angelica, kept the plant going. And then my mother kept the plant going. And if you go into the reserve today, you're going to see this incredible plant that just is like, I don't know, I want to say like as big as a football field, but
wow.
Yeah. And so I have a little cutting, and it's a medicinal that I use for my hair, for my skin, for my tummy, and that I share with people who need it.
I'm blown away by the story because it feels like, we've always thought of plants as community. They're a community with each other and they're a community with us, and they've played such a major part in healing us and feeding us and providing us with shade when there are extreme weather events.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that people are rediscovering them, but they have been such a part of our journey from the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And And the story that you're telling about the placenta is just a reminder that that's where we come from. And so that's beautiful. You've done some pretty amazing things in your life. Like you are, like I mentioned, you've received an Emmy, you've written books, you wrote the Latina Bible, you've written this book right here, The Daughters of Latin America. And then the other thing that you did, which was for me how I first discovered you, is that you did a documentary of one of my favorite authors, Toni Morrison. I remember being pregnant and reading Song of Solomon and Beloved and The Bluest Eye. Like I've read everything she ever wrote. And so I'd be curious about how this upbringing that you had, this rootedness in matriarchy and the traditions of our ancestors shaped you and informed you as a journalist, and how that has influenced what you have literally birthed for all of us to consume.
Well, I come from a long line of storytellers. We are Afro-Indigenous storytellers. And if you've ever been into a living room or just the corner poet, we have poets everywhere. And so my first teachers were my tias, or my mom, my grandmothers, my uncles, storytellers with exquisite detail and a lot of body into the story. And so I would say after dark and during the dinner, we would share stories. So I've always been surrounded by storytelling. And I wanted to be a journalist from a very young age because I never saw the stories of my people, Puertorriqueños and Puertorriqueñas, and other immigrants from even parts like I would say Italy, and I grew up in Jersey City, New Jersey. I was born I'm a Jersey Rican. A Jersey Rican. I was born in Puerto Rico, and I came here when I was 10 years old. And I would read the newspapers, and I never fully saw the stories of my neighbors, African Americans and other immigrants and Puertorriqueños, in the fullest of expressions. I always saw a lot of negative stories. And so I said, I'm going to change that when I grow up. And so that was my introduction as a professional storyteller. And that was my inspiration to tell stories of people in their full humanity, people and communities that are outside the margins in whatever way I could. So I started my career at a newspaper, El Diario La Prensa.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
Shout out to my bestie, Rosana Rosado.
Yes.
You should have her on the podcast.
She's pretty amazing.
And I just went from there. I was trained by the best. And so no matter what platform, whether it's a newsletter, whether it's your home kitchen, whether it's radio or podcasting or television or film, I love the idea of sharing stories. So that's really the essence of what I do.
Well, I can't imagine it having been easy, though. There had to be a lot of challenges, right? You're an Afro-Indigenous Boricua in a discipline that is dominated by men.
White men,
mm-hmm. Right?
Rich white men.
Yes. And so you want to tell stories that are rooted in our history, in our struggle, in our successes, in our achievements. And they have a particular perspective of how you define that. So, how did you navigate your way through that? Because you've done everything from written books to birthed books for other people. You said that you want to be a doula for creation, for women who want to write books.
Yes.
And so it isn't just that you've learned it and developed the discipline. You've also shared the expertise with other people. And I can't imagine it having been easy navigating your way through that kind of world. I know that in every discipline, it's a challenge, but that one in particular, it's taken, even now you turn on Spanish TV and you see blondes, who speak Spanish like a European, but you don't see Afro-Indigeneity. So cuéntame, tell me what that was like, because I think people will want to know how the lessons from our mothers and our grandmothers have navigated us through that kind of environment.
It was not easy. And still, it's not easy when you want to tell stories in a way that differ from what your employer wants to tell the story. What we must understand is that a media is a business, and advertisers are advertising in spaces where they want to advertise to certain communities. And there's a lot of narratives that are misguided, misinformed. I have always understood, or I've always tried to understand the canvas, right, of where I was. So whether I was at El Diario or I was at Good Day New York, where I was a producer, or Telemundo, where I was a producer, or then, the New York Post or Latina Magazine, and now USA Today, I understand the platform that I'm in. So it's really important to understand where you're at and who the audience is. Yes, there's racism, sexism, and there's classism because there's colorism. There's a lot of isms in our world, and my mother would always say, "Sigue pa'lante." Como un elefante, like the salsa songs.
Yes.
Or she would say, dale pichón. She was always my, mami, me pasó esto, and she would say, nena, sigue pa'lante. She was imbued with a sense of purpose and a sense of positivity. This is a woman who came to America with a 5th grade education. She was the star seamstress in her factory. She used to make sneakers, Pro-Keds.
I remember Pro-Keds.
You remember Pro-Keds?
Yeah.
And so she was a star seamstress. But in terms of having an education and speaking the language, it was, she was entering a new world. And she had to be imbued with a sense of yo puedo.
Claro.
And I'm going to. And so that's the sense that I was imbued with. So whatever contratiempo, whatever challenge I have experienced, it's important to, I think, share with the people who are listening, just have a community with whom you can share whatever it is you're going through. Have, even if it's just one best friend, sharing, and also like, you should know lawyers. And you should keep notes.
Yeah.
And so, there's always going to be all kinds of challenges in life. And it's how you pick up yourself from all of the ways that we are being oppressed.
You've accomplished a lot. It isn't just that you've worked for these big platforms, but you've also written these books. And then you also, I keep going back to Toni Morrison.
Can we talk about her?
Yes, please, because I'm just fascinated by that entire story, how you met her and how you did this. I would love for you to share that.
Sure. I love her so much. Toni Morrison is a friend in my head and an ancestor that I keep very close. And more than 10 years ago, my husband was recruited to work at a boarding school in New Hampshire, the great poet Willie Perdomo.
Yes.
The talented and great poet Willie Perdomo. So he was recruited to teach English in this boarding school. And so I went with him, with our youngest son, Neruda. The oldest, Barbaro, BJ, stayed back in New York. And I was very lonely the first few months. I didn't know anybody. And
it's New Hampshire. Do they even have plantains in New Hampshire?
Yo, they called them plantations when I found them.
Oh, no.
And the woman was checking out and she goes, these are plantations, right? And I was like, whoa.
Oh, no.
They're platanos, baby girl. But it was very lonely. And every time I stepped outside of our home, people wanted to know, where are you from? And where are you from wasn't a friendly question. It was like, where are you from, to place me in a position, in opposition or in a position that was different from whatever grew in New Hampshire. And it got exhausting. And a friend of mine had said, I just did a really interesting read of this author, from the first book. Joan Didion was the book, the author she read. From beginning and end of all the works, she called it The Summer of Didion. And I was like, how fascinating to read an author from her first novel to her last, or her first book to her last, And I was like, who can I read? And I had a list. I had only taken 20 books from New York to New Hampshire. And I had a long list of authors who I want to spend time with. Gabriel Garcia Marquez was one of them. I read a couple of his books and I was like, I would love to read all of his works.
Wow.
And Toni Morrison was another. And I remember my husband had said something really interesting when he met my family in the south of Puerto Rico in Peñuelas, my father's family. And he said, your relatives remind me of characters in Toni Morrison novels. So if you notice, there's a somebody that in the documentary, somebody refers to the characters of Toni Morrison and how they're, wretched and sometimes you don't want to meet them and they're, wild and beautiful and tragic. And so I was curious to find Puerto Ricans, Boricuas in the novels of Toni Morrison.
Yeah.
And so I started with The Bluest Eye, which I had read years ago, and I borrowed it from the library. And it hadn't been checked out because people don't buy books anymore of the library, this beautiful library. It had mold. And then I read Sula, which reminded me of the women in Peñuelas, in El Barrio de Santo Domingo, where I spent my childhood. And then I read The Song of Solomon, which we talked about earlier. Yeah. And it was such a glorious experience. I wasn't bothered anymore about the questions. I was in these worlds that were opening portals inside my heart and in my soul. And it continued from there. And I read all of her novels, 11. And then my husband gave me a nonfiction book, Playing in the Dark, on whiteness and the literary imagination, which I recommend to anybody who wants to teach or write, or just anybody in general. Right. And I just kept reading everything she wrote, essays, and read her speeches. And at the end of the experience, I was like, you think you read someone for pleasure. This is all pleasure, by the way. This was not an assignment. This is just pleasure reading. And you think you read Toni Morrison for pleasure. And what you discover is that you read her for liberation, right? And I wanted to know this author who had changed my life, transformed my world so profoundly. And I Googled Toni Morrison documentary 2014, 2015, and there was none. And she had said in one of her famous speeches, if you want to read a book that has not been written, write it. And imbued with that, inspired by that, I said, well, I'm going to make a documentary on Toni Morrison that I want to watch. And that's what started the journey of her documentary. I happened to be working with a director who was her photographer, and we were working on a documentary called The Women's List, also for the American Masters portfolio. And he was the only person that I knew her who had access to Toni. So the next time I saw him, I said, your next documentary is going to be a documentary on Toni Morrison. And he goes, okay. But first let's finish this one. Wow. And so that's kind of like how it all was rooted on these readings of 500 years of American history. And I did not find necessarily Puerto Ricans, but I found Puerto Ricans in her books, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah. So it's making me think of this friend that I had who was studying for her master's at Yale. And she wanted to do something on Zora Neale Hurston, and it was on folklore. And I said, maybe you want to go to Puerto Rico and find the same stories? And she said, really? I said, you're going to find that when you go down deep south and you go to Puerto Rico, because we're talking about the African diaspora, right? We're talking about the same people ending up in different parts, that those are the same stories. And she did. She went and she said, oh my God, they're the same stories. So for you to find your family in her books, for us, it's not surprising. And it's really about connection, right? It's liberation, but it's connection about how, because we're talking about matriarchal ancestors, right? And it's the spiritual connection between our people and how we ended up in a lot of different places. I'm curious about how you met her. What happened? So you've done all this work, you've read all the books, you're like in the rhythm of it. Yes. And then like, how do you meet her? How does that happen?
So I wrote the treatment. So a couple of months after I tell Timothy that I wanted to, make this documentary, he calls me out of the blue and he says, so you want to make a documentary about Toni Morrison? I said, I do. He says, why don't you write the treatment? Mm-hmm. And so I write the treatment, and he went and he secured the funding. And a year or maybe less than a year later, I am sitting in front of the legend herself.
That's amazing. That's
like
so cool.
This is the so setup
cool. Yeah.
with the camera. And we did it straight. We did Toni. We filmed Toni straight to camera. So she's the only one looking at the camera. And then a constellation of people who could comment about her work were not straight to camera. So here I am sitting in front of her in her boathouse in New York, by the river, by the way, by the river where a character named Beloved came to visit her. Goosebumps.
Yes,
goosebumps. Right? And I had a momentary paralysis. I'm like, I am with one of the most intelligent human beings, the most beautifully gifted literary star. And I don't want to make a fool of myself. I just took a deep breath, and I told her I loved her.
Yeah.
And I felt I was prepared because I had read everything that she had ever written and heard everything she had read. And one of the things you learn quickly about what you do as a journalist is you have to make sure you're prepared. And if you're going to meet Toni Morrison, or if you're going to meet anybody, you have to read their work. There's nothing more insulting
absolutely
than to sit down with somebody who hasn't read the work. And, people who are being interviewed, they know you're bluffing. And so she understood that I had read everything from the questions that I asked her. So I met her in her boathouse. She was delightful and generous. And I remember I asked her about her childhood. I asked her about, it was whatever I wanted to ask, right? So could you imagine living with her works for 2 years and then having the incredible honor of engaging with her, all the questions I had about her work? I feel in many ways it was a dream, but it wasn't. It was real. And I remember at a time when I thought the documentary was in danger of being made. And I remember she came to me in a dream. And indigenous people, indigenous Boricuas, the dream space is very special. The dream space is just like the awake space in many ways. And I remember she was swimming. We were by the riverbed, by the Guayanés River, which is a river where my grandmother swam naked. My mother said, no, I'm going to keep my clothes on. Your grandmothers were the ones that swam naked. My grandmother, Gualamilla, my father's mother, used to be a laundress. She was a house slave to a Spaniard family, and she would wash the clothes in this river. So this river is very, very special in our family. And so Toni Morrison and I were in this river, and Toni was wearing a really nice bathing suit. And somebody served us what looked to be like champagne. It was a golden, beautiful liquid. And I think it was this young neighborhood boy, beautiful little boy named Edgardito. And he was serving us food and this, champagne. And we were swimming and we were just chatting up. And I knew the documentary was going to be made. Meeting her was, for me, I think this was the apex of my career. Having done the work, having understood the meaning of language and how we have taken language and repurposed it to tell our stories, made it more expansive, made it more meaningful, made it more muscular. She taught me that.
Language is what has made it possible for us to make it through colonialism and enslavement.
Yeah.
And the connection is, to be honest, I'm getting chills listening because my grandmother was sort of, she was in a shack being used by the Spaniard who owned the big house. And I think that our stories are very similar to what happens in the Deep South. You know, people often ask about the connection between the Puerto Rican community and the Black American community, and it goes way back. I mean, we think about Arturo Schomburg and how that is the place where people learn about the mid-Atlantic trade. I hear from young people that, you know, when we talk about the term indigeneity, indigeneity is often referred to indigeneity as defined by Native Americans, but Black people are displaced indigenous people.
That's right.
And we share very similar ways of thinking about faith, about spirituality, about sharing, about community. And so we embody those traditions and they come through our maternal line. And so I really, really appreciate you sharing that. I'm not going to lie, as a Toni Morrison fan, was sort of fan crushing. And you gifted us with that documentary because it documented her journey. And so I could see how, and I believe that came through a dream. I mean, some people are going to be watching saying, oh no, but we know. Those of us who know.
The great thing is that I have witnesses. You know, my husband he was like, this is incredible. He thinks I'm a force of nature. And seeing this unfold. And, you know, the beautiful thing about a documentary is that it's a team. There's a director and there's the producers. I was one of the producers there, as well as an interviewer. There's the sound engineer. So there's like a collaborative effort, and it was a small team. There's the editor who also, you know, shapes it and, you know, whips it into final stage. And then with her documentary, she has inspired so many people that art and music. We kicked off the documentary by interviewing Angela Davis. So I also had to pinch myself in that moment. Hello.
Yes.
And then we also interviewed Oprah Winfrey, who I love Oprah. I know, you know, that Oprah is not everybody's cup of tea. She is my cup of tea. She's also from the South. And we also connected. And to learn through research that Oprah started her book club because she wanted to share with the world Toni Morrison books is incredibly beautiful and powerful to have on camera. I don't think people really knew that about Oprah, that her famous book club was started because, and she went back into, she says, you know, in the documentary, she says, you know, I started offering America, you know, very basic books, you know, Jane meets, you know, Dick meets Jane, they have babies and, you know, they
Sure.
whatever. And then she says, I hit him with Toni Morrison. So she went back into Toni's archive and she recommended The Bluest Eye to America to reread. She recommended The Song of Solomon to reread. She recommended Sula. So that was an incredible and powerful moment in my journalistic life. I interviewed composers, and it was a really powerful moment in my life as a storyteller because I did get to tell the story of one of the most important storytellers of the 21st century.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's not a surprise that we're living in a time right now where they're literally burning books and taking books away from us because these books are document. It's literally sort of like evidence.
Her books were banned.
Yes.
Back in the 80s, Paradise was banned. She got a letter.
Oh my goodness.
From the universe. Yeah, it was in the documentary. Yeah. And, you know, she's got such a great sense of humor that she has that letter in the guest bathroom. So
where it should be.
As you're washing your hands, you're like chuckling, oh, you can incite a riot? Paradise.
Yes.
Because really, if you want to write a book where people are not moved to do some things like make society more just, then you're not really writing anything, right? You're supposed to touch lives. You're supposed to move, you know, molecules inside somebody so they can reach further into love and justice. And that's what she did. And that's what a lot of us do. And I think that's what the matriarchs do. And that's what root women do. And to go back to your mentioning like how we have so many similarities with the Black Southern communities. Of course, we were part of this transatlantic slave trade. So we were dropped off from after, you know, we were stolen from Africa, parts of Africa, and brought to Puerto Rico. My father started working in a sugar plantation when he was 4 years old. And he used to give water with my godfather, Toquiro. So imagine a 5-year-old and a 6-year-old going around the plantation, because it was still a plantation.
Right.
My father would have been like in the 1940s. So it was still a plantation culture. And he was giving water to parched plantation workers in the heat of the tropics.
Right.
If you've ever been to the Caribbean, you know the sun doesn't shine like it shines in the north in the summer. You know that the sun cracks open rocks. And so absolutely, we have everything in common.
It's
the
the same people.
indigeneity, it's the people, and it's also the mixtures. I don't know if you know that Toni's grandmother was indigenous.
No.
And on her father's side. And I believe she was, I think it was Cherokee. Yeah. And they, the family inherited land, and it was stolen from them. So we have this Black indigenous connection, Toni Morrison and I, that we share. And if you go to, now they're like, what do they call them? They're tourist destinations in the southern part of Puerto Rico. So you can visit a plantation and see how the big house was constructed in the same way as they were constructed in the South.
They have those in New Orleans too.
Yes.
These tourist destinations to go visit plantations.
Yes.
And New Orleans feels a lot like Puerto Rico.
Yes.
It feels very Caribbean.
Yes.
It feels like home.
I haven't been yet, but I want to go.
Yeah, it feels like home.
This year I'm going to go.
It feels like the trees remember.
Yes.
Like they tell stories.
They do.
Like literally you feel like the ancestors are like walking the earth and you're just right there in the middle of it. That's how it feels. Although since Hurricane Katrina and the kind of displacement and homogenization that is taking place in that part of the country, it feels like that is like they're taking that spirit right out of the community. But yeah, it feels very familiar, very similar.
You know, the trees know me by my name.
The trees remember.
In the rainforest.
Yes,
you know,
for real.
I have grandmother trees that I go visit and sit with and talk to. And when we're together, when we coincide in the motherland, I will take you to these trees. They're healing and beautiful, and they tell stories and they hold memory. For sure.
Which is why we talk so much about taking care of the mother, right? And now we're living in the age of climate change, and literally people are forgetting what the ancestors told us was coming and how to avoid that. But I'm still thinking about Toni, obviously. And I'm also looking at this book, Daughters of Latin America, because you do this amazing, you create this amazing gift for all of us to watch and enjoy, and takes us back to the books that she's written and introduces us to her personally, which is so important to all of us. And then you write this, you put together this international anthology. Can you share with us why you did that?
Sure.
And also, I've met journalists before, and they stay sort of like in their lane, and they're writing articles, but you have no lane. You are sort of like at the intersection of all of our matriarchal needs. And because you're talking about healing, you're talking about spirituality, you're talking about taking care of Mother Earth, you're talking about the written word and the power of it. I see all the connections between everything that you've been talking about. And that resonates with me because that feels matriarchal. I think people often think matriarchal means that matriarchal is a way of thinking and a way of building community. And I think people misunderstand what that is. You know, even when we're talking about the earth, we're talking about rematriating, right? Mm-hmm. So share that with me, because I'm having like all of these things are just like popping up as you're talking. I'm like, yes to all of it.
How Daughters of Latin America was born is a really beautiful story. Shout out to the editor, Tracy Sherrod, who was at the time the executive editor of Amistad Books. And she had sent a book with my husband called Daughters of Africa. And that's the little sister of Daughters of Africa. And Tracy had said, see if, Sandra likes it. We're thinking about doing something. Well, I later learned that's why it came into my hands. And every night I was sipping. The editor was of Daughters of Africa, which was an international anthology, was able to feature about 210 daughters of Africa from all over the world into about 960 pages. I got 500 pages. So I'm a competitor. I wanted 210. So I only got 140 into 500 pages. And so I had to do some really heavy duty curating. And that's how it was born. It was born out of a need to also have, in book form, a collection of writings by daughters of Latin America. And I remember after I signed the contract, I called Tracy and I said, so Tracy, so what are you thinking? And she says, about what? I said, what do you want to see with this anthology? She's like, baby girl, it is your anthology. You could do whatever you want. Could you imagine being told by an editor, you can do whatever you want?
It's amazing. Yeah.
I was like, wow.
Yes, fiesta.
So fiesta, I went to town. I went to town with this. I had already a list of all the authors who had shaped my life. And so when I look at Latin America, I look at it with a decolonized lens. Latin America is also Haiti. It's also it's also Guadeloupe. It's also Barbados. It's also Jamaica. It's also Brazil. It's also the Guyanas. And so I look at it as a region, right? So there in this book, there are women who write in Spanish or in English or in French. But I also look at Latin America as with all of the nations that exist. Because for instance, in Mexico alone, you can speak an indigenous language every day of the year without ever having to speak Spanish or English or French or Dutch or any of the colonizing languages.
People lump us together as if we're homogenous.
Absolutely.
Even with my last name, Yeampierre, I'm like, where do you think it's
Hello.
from? What do you think happened there?
I know.
The name tells a story, but absolutely. I love that you did that because I think that that's the beauty of being from the Americas.
Right.
People think of America as a country. I'm like, the United States is a country. There are about 35 countries. And within those countries, there's a lot of diversity in terms of languages that people speak and culture. And that's what makes it so cool and interesting.
And fascinating and global and profound.
Absolutely.
And so I had read a statistic that every 14 days, an indigenous language dies around the world.
Every 14 days.
Yes, according to UNESCO. What happens when a language dies, when an ancestral language dies?
It's almost like a people die.
It's a severing of incredible knowledge, of millennial wisdom. What to call the stars, what to call love, what to call the earth and a flower. We forget the songs, right? One contributor, Jasnaya Aguilar, she's a Mije, she's from the Mije Nation. She says indigenous in the anthology. She's in conversation with another writer, and she tells the writer, languages don't die; they're murdered, they're assassinated.
The first thing that was taken from us was our language.
Yeah.
When our ancestors were enslaved, the first thing they took was the language.
Yeah.
It's one of the reasons why in Yoruba traditions, it's so important to maintain that.
Yeah.
Why we say alafia, maferefung. We want to keep that language alive. And Taino language is alive, like it literally inserted in everything that we experience, everything from hurricanes to ganua, to like it's part of our language.
Puerto Rican Spanish is probably the Spanish with more indigenous words, with more Arawak words than probably any other, language in the Americas. But I bring up the subject of language and indigenous language because in this anthology, I was able to do something really, really special. There are about 24 Native poets, writers in the anthology, and they still write in their ancestral mother tongues. And it was very important for me to publish them in English because everything was translated into the English language. And also next to them have the ancestral language so that people can see the writing systems.
Absolutely.
And have tangible, visual, sensory to see this language is alive. And it just made me so excited that I was able to do this. And it's one of my proudest achievements in the book.
I was about to ask you that.
You were?
Yeah, I was. I wanted to say, well,
Yay.
with all of these accomplishments, what is the thing that gives you the most pride, that makes you feel like, because this was complex, what you did.
It was complex and it was beautiful and it was filled with prayer and research. I spent a lot of time reading and it was such a beautiful process because, for instance, I would reach out to, I'll give you an example, Dalma Llanos Figueroa.
I know Dalma.
Do you know Dalma?
Yes.
Do you know Dalma's work?
I met her in the mountains of Puerto Rico, doing, especially after Hurricane Maria, when she was teaching children how to literally plant seeds and reclaim the land so that we can start growing our own food.
So Dalma writes about a particular community of women who are Black women in Puerto Rico. And she's working on, I think it's a trilogy, right? And anyway, I called Dalma, she's on the list, and I asked her if she wanted to submit. And she says, absolutely. Let me think about what I want to submit. And then she says, but do you know about Danielle Legros? And I said, no, I don't know her. She's Haitian and she's a poet and she's now an ancestor. She's based in Boston. And do you know about Carolina? And she starts to tell me about other writers. And then I call Danielle and I call Carolina and I read their work and I want them to submit work. And then they tell me, but do you know? So it was women also sharing their favorite writers that they wanted to be in community with. So it would just became multiplied. All of these women, well, do you know? And so that was also an incredibly beautiful experience to share in community. Then I would reach some women through their agents and the agents would say, no, not interested. First of all, to have these many women in the book meant a lot of money.
Yeah.
And I couldn't pay what I wanted to pay. And so they had to be an agreement that everybody would get a very minimal fee for all of us to be in this party. And for me to also have money to sustain myself.
Yes.
And so agents, they're like, money, right? And then I would say, well, I am the daughter of Lidia Gonzalez Santos.
See?
And I would knock on their personal doors. And then that's how I got Cecilia Vicuña, she's an incredible Chilena. I don't know if you know her work. She's a visual artist that always starts with the word. And she knits these quipes, these accounting methods of the Aztec Empire. And she's a daughter of a matriarch. And she travels right now with her mother all over the world when she gets all these prizes. And so, she said, yes, pues claro que sí. So all of these women who wanted to be part of it, I dreamt about these women. So this was a process that was both intellectual and spiritual and so much fun.
No, I can see the continuum. I mean, it is clearly a continuum. So the last question that I have is, if you had an opportunity to go to talk to your great-grandmother, if you had an opportunity to talk to your great-grandmother, what would you want to know or what would you want to say or ask her?
Oh, wow. I love that question. The question makes me think about a question I have. What is the thing that you do that feels most like prayer? And so that is a question that reminds me of prayer. I want to know everything, Mama Ramona. And then there's a grandmother whose name they call Lolo. And then Marta Moreno Vega said to me, that's what they called all the Spaniards. That's what they named all of us because of the way that we spoke. And so I would like to speak to my great-grandmothers and tell me how to know the land again, how to know the land again. Because when you know the land again, you know yourself again. The land is the ancestor in our tradition.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Well, Mija, thank you so much. This is a dream come true. I think that it is so rich, not just everything that you've done, how you have been a weaver and brought all of these different voices together and then put light on them and just lifted them up and showed that continuum of spirituality and ancestry. I think that is why we talk about the matriarchy. We can't talk about the matriarchy without talking about the land and without talking about how we have always lived within our carbon footprint, and how these are the stories that are going to take us to a future that is going to protect us as we move forward. These are the stories that give us strength, that give us power. So gracias de corazón. Ashe.
In Arawak, I would say Bomatum, which means sacred thanks. And the equivalent of Ashe would be Han Han Katu. Much success in your podcast. And thank you for having me. It's been an honor. Un abrazote, mi amor.
So, compañera, where can we find you? Like, where, if for the listeners, like, what are your media platforms? Where can we get access to your books? Like, where can we find you?
I love that question. I'm on Instagram, and so it's Miss Sandra Guzmán. So it's MS and then my name. I'm also on Facebook, Sandra Guzmán Writer. I don't do Twitter anymore. And my website, sandraguzman.com.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And you can find Bangles and Headdresses on YouTube, on Spotify, on Instagram, and it's at Bangles and Headdresses. Thank you so much.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Tell me about the fly name.
Oh, Bangles and Headdresses?
Yes.
Oh, so I grew up watching my mother my mom you knew she was coming. She had multiple ankle bracelets. She had a bracelet around her waist. She had lots of bracelets. These are actually her bracelets. These are over 50 years old. She wore them every day, and she always had her hair in a headdress. And so when I think about what beauty looks like and how we adorn, we have a long history of adorning ourselves. I mean, people think that that's a new thing, but the truth is that no matter what we were going through, no matter where we were, we would always adorn. And so it feels like it's part of the matrilineal line of how we adorn ourselves, whether it was in the plantation, whether it was whatever we were doing. Women would pick up their hair and they would do a headdress, and then the bracelets, like these are representative of Oshun, right? And my mom she would wear this big skirt, and she had a tiny little waist. And so that's where the name came from. I wanted something that honored my mother. And so I called it Bangles and Headdresses.
I love it. Yeah. We adorned ourselves so much, and by we I mean Boricuas, right? That when the Spaniards arrived and they saw the beauty, we had like gold hoops, and they went nuts for the gold. Yes. We had seashells. They couldn't. They were like, show me where that gold is.
But that's the history of the Global South,
Absolutely.
Of women from the Global South, whether they're from Mother Africa, the Caribbean, wherever we are. That's our history, to adorn with whatever we have.
Absolutely.
We can make something beautiful out of nothing.
And it's intentional, the minerals ground us. Like it's not just, I'm just going to wear this, copper. I mean, these are crystals and minerals that
we're healing.
Heal us. Absolutely.
Absolutely healing.
Yeah.
My mom always had a copper bracelet. She's like, Mija, this is what you need. Really, you're going to always need this. Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. It is grounded in our traditions and in medicine. Like our adornment was medicine, Thank you for asking that question.
I love that.